Thank you, sir. I rise today to speak in support of Senate Joint Resolution 14, which we will vote on later today. I want to thank Senator Heinrich, Senator Markey, Senator King for their leadership on this resolution. And I might be mistaken, Mr. President, but I understand when you were governor of Colorado, you might have been present at the creation of this point of view that's expressed in the resolution before. So maybe salutes Colorado. The American people rely on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that our nation has clean air, clean water, and clean environment in a safe climate. Unfortunately, in 2020, under the previous administration, the EPA strayed from its mission any number of times. One of those missteps was that agency's methane rescission rule, which deregulated methane emissions from oil and gas industry, our nation's largest industrial source of this dangerous greenhouse gas. By passing this resolution, Congress today will reject and nullify this dangerous rule and restore clean air and climate protections from our nation's largest sources of methane pollution. Let me explain what methane is and why it's so harmful to our climate and to our health. Methane is a super pollutant. It damages our lungs and our planet. Compared to carbon dioxide, methane is a small part of our overall greenhouse gas emissions. Having said that, though, scientists tell us that methane is responsible for roughly, get this, 1/4 of the man-made global warming that we're witnessing today. Let me say that again. Methane is responsible for roughly 1/4 of the man-made global warming that we're experiencing and witnessing today. Over a 20-year period, methane is 84 times more harmful to our climate than carbon dioxide. 84 times. For a small molecule, methane punches above its weight when it comes to its contributions to climate change. The oil and gas industry is our nation's largest source of methane, responsible for nearly 30% of total methane emissions. For comparison, this amount of methane pollution has the same climate effect as the emissions from our nation's entire fleet of passenger vehicles in a year. In addition to damaging our climate, methane emissions also contribute to ground-level ozone, known as smog. Breathing in smog harms our lungs. It aggravates lung diseases like bronchitis and asthma. Exposure to smog has been linked to premature death, and children and elderly are particularly vulnerable to these health risks. If we want to meaningfully tackle the danger to our health and our climate, we need to reduce methane emissions from the entire oil and gas sector. In 2016, as I was alluding to earlier, Mr. President, EPA acted to do just that, building on state actions such as Colorado, whose former chief executive is presiding at this moment. EPA put into place common sense Clean Air Act regulations that require the oil and gas industry to update its equipment. The rule also required the industry to inspect frequently in order to find and repair leaks and malfunctions that are such a big source of our methane problem. Based on feedback from the oil and gas industry, meeting these new emission requirements did not place an undue burden on companies or raise costs for consumers. In fact, many oil and gas companies and industry groups supported the measures, and they still do. That's why it's so surprising, it was so surprising, when in September of 2020, EPA issued the final methane rescission rule to roll back what so many believe to be a common sense approach for reducing methane risks. While the Trump administration moved forward with this damaging policy, the consequences of climate change were roiling our nation. California, for example, experienced its worst wildfire season on record, with forest fires covering an area about the size of the state of Rhode Island. Other western states, including Oregon, Montana, and Colorado, were ablaze with unprecedented damaging wildfires. At the same time, other parts of our country were being battered by violent extreme weather. The people of Iowa experienced one of the most costly thunderstorms in history. Hurricane-force winds caused $7.5 billion in economic damage and flattened, I'm told, over half of that state's corn and soybean crops in one day. Coastal towns in southern states like Florida, like Louisiana, like South Carolina were battered by hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. In the summer of 2020, last summer, we saw the most hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean in recorded history. Despite all of this, the Trump administration took a step to undo one of the key tools available to us to combat methane emissions that contribute greatly to climate change. The methane rescission rule was a stark departure from the widely accepted, science-based, and common-sense view that we should protect people and our planet from the dangers of methane. In promulgating the methane rescission rule, the Trump administration ignored the global scientific community, including EPA's own agency scientists, who warned that the extreme weather events of 2020 were just the tip of the iceberg of consequences we can expect if we don't keep global warming below an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius between now and 2040. The bottom line is that the Trump methane rescission rule would allow more methane pollution, increase public health dangers, and bring us ever closer to the brink of irreversible climate catastrophe. It is a Trump EPA action that my colleagues and I reject today through the resolution before us. The methane rescission rule stated methane couldn't be regulated under the Clean Air Act. We reject that. The methane rescission rule stated EPA couldn't regulate the entire oil and gas sector from wellhead to storage. We reject that. The methane rescission rule stated greenhouse gases couldn't be regulated. We reject that. The methane rescission rule also reversed EPA's long-standing position on what is required to regulate a pollutant, making it harder for EPA to implement clean air and climate protections. We reject that as well. With approval of this resolution, though, EPA can and should still move forward to strengthen methane standards for the oil and gas sector in the future. This effort is also very timely, coming on the heels of President Biden's climate commitment for our nation to reduce emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by the end of this decade, by 2030. Passing this resolution will be good for our health, passing this resolution will be good for our planet, and passing this resolution will be good for America's economy. And that's why so many states, so many environmental groups, and even a number of significant oil and gas companies support this resolution. Joining over 60 environmental groups as well as 20 states' attorney general, 7 major oil and gas companies support today's resolution to reinstate requirements to control methane emissions. From the Environmental Defense Fund to Shell, from the League of Conservation Voters to BP, from the Natural Resources Defense Council to Equinor, there is a broad consensus among the stakeholders with different interests, that Congress should reject and nullify the methane rescission rule. So why do a number of oil and gas companies want Congress to reject the Trump rule, restore existing regulations, and pursue further regulations? They know the best way to boost growth in their sector and across the economy is to keep methane and other climate pollution in check. With unchecked methane releases in its operations, natural gas production and use become part of the climate problem, not a part of the solution as we endeavor to drive toward lower carbon fuels. Companies know where the global market is heading. They know regulations will support innovation and technology deployment in their industry, bringing down emission reduction cost for everyone. I sometimes like to quote Albert Einstein, who said, among other things, this. He said, in adversity lies opportunity. Think about that. In adversity lies opportunity. We can see that in the issue of methane pollution and climate change. It presents plenty of challenges, yes, that's true, but it also presents a remarkable opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to protect our planet, improve the air that we breathe, and strengthen our economy. At the same time, the product that the oil and gas industry is capturing can be sold to fuel more homes and businesses across the country. I want to say that again, too. At the same time, the product that the oil and gas industry is capturing can be sold to fuel more homes and businesses across the country. That's why today I will gladly vote for this resolution, which reaffirms that the Clean Air Act requires EPA to take action to protect Americans from dangerous pollution like methane. In passing this resolution today, Congress is rejecting the Trump rule baseless interpretation of the Clean Air Act, and in its place, reinstating common sense, methane, public health, and climate protections across the entire oil and gas sector. We're also clearing a path for additional protections from methane and other hazardous climate pollutants. As a Senate, we're making our intent clearer. The Clean Air Act gives EPA the authority and the mandate to establish methane emission standards, even stronger than the ones that we reinstate with this resolution. This includes all facets of the oil and gas industry now and moving forward, from production to processing and from transmission to storage. We're saying to EPA loud and clear, it is your mission to protect the environment, to protect human health and public welfare from the dangers of climate pollutants like methane. And there's a lot of work still to do before that mission can be achieved. It's time that we get to that work. We don't have a lot of time to waste. And Mr. President, I have a couple of unanimous consent requests I'd like to offer. One is to place supportive materials into the record. And I ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to enter into the record several materials in support of Senate Joint Resolution 14 that's before us today. First, the Biden administration's statement of administration policy supporting passage of the resolution. Second, 2 letters of support for passing this joint resolution, one from the 57 leading environmental and advocacy groups, and another, the Shell Oil Company. These letters demonstrate the breadth of support for regulating this harmful pollutant and rejecting the methane rescission rule. And I ask unanimous consent that these be inserted into the record as appropriate.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, I'm going to yield the floor, but before I do, I want to salute you for your role in an earlier day, in an earlier place, your state of Colorado, for helping get this started. We're in your debt. Good work. God bless. And with that, I yield the floor.